what are we doing, within our companies versus what we're actually giving to the FDA, right? And what they're asking for in the URRA, we're all compliant with 14971, right? And that talks about risk in a way that doesn't include everything that you see here in UFMEA, right? I think one of the major things is that the FDA has made very clear through, all of their human factors guidances over the past 10 years or so that, probability of occurrence is not something that they're really interested in when it comes to task criticality, right? So we may need those things. We may need to have those estimates as best as we can, as well as our, PRN or RPN numbers that show overall risk. But if the FDA isn't really interested in seeing that, then, what is the strategy to take, right? And I think there are a couple different things that people are doing. One might be to have two different documents. So you may use a UFMEA is probably the most common tool for doing being the basis of the use-related risk assessment. So you might have that and then have certain pieces of information that encompass your URRA, which could be a different document, or it could all be sort of rolled into one. But then you really want to think about, again, what is the information that you're giving to the FDA, and are you giving them too much where it's sort of overwhelming, right? I mean, I know some of these UFMEAs can have many columns, and that's fine. You want to document everything, but in this instance, really thinking about how are we going to achieve, our human factors goals and show regulatory bodies what they're looking for without all of this other noise, right? And I know that there are still companies who are sort of, they're using those probability ratings to try and, demonstrate safe and effective use, and this isn't likely to happen. But I mean, I think we know, at this point that companies really need to align with what the FDA is actually looking for in terms of how you're defining critical tasks and the information that you're giving them to show that you've reduced use-related risks to the extent possible. Shannon, if you want to add anything else.
No, Natalie, I agree. And I think the thing to remember is when we talk about risk and human factors, there are two purposes for this tool that we're trying to satisfy with this tool. For risk, we're trying to estimate and understand the potential risk of our product so we can ultimately mitigate out that risk and do a benefit risk analysis. For human factors, we're wanting to identify any tasks that could lead to harm due to a use error, and then use that to drive the scope of our activities. So in the human factors world, the tool is really there to drive what we need to look at. We're from a safety type perspective. And then that information can then help inform the risk. So I think as long as whether you use one tool or two tools, whatever it takes so that you can get to that right level of information to inform those two activities. It's two somewhat different lenses that you need to have on the data to drive that. The challenge personally that I have with the UFMEA is there's a standard out there for FMEAs. It's IEC 608-12-2018 that outlines that as very much it's an engineering tool looking at failures. And so as you're following that, there's some assumptions that go into a typical FMEA, and single point failures and the like, and sometimes that can run into tension. So if a group is driving the FMEA with some FMEA framework versus what you need from the human factors perspective, where you want to identify anything that could cause harm, is a little more open-ended. So sometimes that can cause tension when you're trying to build those into the same tool based on the way your processes are set up and your teams are working. So just something to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, you're trying to get some consolidated data.